Have you ever thought about what goes into teaching a card class? Well, even if you haven't, maybe you're starting to feel like you're in a Christmas card making crunch. And I know you'll want to watch to see these festive card designs. They don't quite fall into my recipe from last week, but they're still quick and easy to make singles or multiples, even for beginners. Let me show you. I'm teaching a card making class to about 30 ladies on Friday night. And the first thing you need to think about is your audience. My ladies are friends from my church, and their interest in crafting ranges from not at all to they could probably teach me a thing or two. And that's okay. This is meant to be mostly a social event where everyone will be successful and have created 4 cards by the end of the evening, which is about 2 hours long. So, given my audience, I designed cards that are simple to make, but with some exposure to basic card making techniques like embossing, stamping, and die cutting. I created 2 that are super simple, and then a 2-for-1 design that's a little more complex. I try to provide very clear, copyable samples, but I also want to allow for some creativity for those who are more confident, especially in the more complex cards. Now, a big limitation for most of us is going to be that we don't have multiple tools like die cutting machines or Misties. I've been doing this long enough that I do have a Gemini Junior and a Platinum 6. So for this class, one table will have the Platinum 6 so they can learn about embossing, and the other one will have the Gemini Junior for their die cutting. I have a couple of Misties as well, so I can spread those around. If you don't have extra tools, you may just need to limit the size of your class. I've taught classes 4 or 5 times now, and I think the easiest setup is to give each crafter a kit of their card bases and envelopes. Then I set up a table for each card design with the specific cardstock pieces and tools, and I let them move from station to station as they like. And if some of them want to stay at level 1 and 2 and skip level 3, that's okay too. I generally cut 4 or 5 more than the number of students, and if I have extras when I get home, well, that just helps me get a head start on my own cards. This time, I'm setting up a final table where everyone can stamp an inside sentiment on their cards if they want. They'll have stamped 2 outside sentiments by that point, so they'll be able to manage it on their own with support if needed. I create instruction documents with step-by-step instructions as well as photos. This year, for the first time, I created short videos showing how I created the samples and QR codes so that people can access the videos on their phones right at the table. I have a couple of friends who come and help me with this. I love it when we can have one person kind of managing each table. My friends are not card makers, but they are crafters, and they're very good at understanding the instructions, helping the participants, and knowing when to call me over. I generally manage the table with the most complex card, but I do hop from table to table over the evening. I have done this completely on my own, and that's where those written instructions really come in handy. Timing is your other limit. To make it easy to complete the 2 beginner level cards, as well as due to the number of die cutting machines, I did most of the die cutting beforehand. In a class like this, I think focusing mostly on assembly caters to the people who don't have a strong interest in card making, plus, it helps to keep everything moving. I base the fee per person on the cost of paper and envelopes that I'm providing, as well as glue. I usually charge about $10 for an evening like this. Okay, now let's get to the card making. Card number 1 is my beginner level card. I started with a simple blue panel, then I spritzed some shimmer spray onto it before using an old 2-dimensional snowflake embossing folder. I provided 2 embossing folders so that people had a choice, but I made sure they were both 2-dimensional. Otherwise, people have to get into understanding how sandwiches are different for different thicknesses of folders. Next, I took the navy strip and I added glue to the back of it. The front of this strip has some texture from an old MFT stamps texture plate. It makes it look like grosgrain ribbon. I added lots of liquid glue all over and then I glued it to the embossed panel. Next, I added glue to the Merry Christmas die cut. I chose this one because it's all one piece, so nothing's going to go missing, and it'll also be easy for people to glue in place. Then I also added glue to the back of a silver snowflake and I placed that on the card front. This is another beginner level card that's easy to create, but it has some interesting details. I started by gluing the white cardstock panel with the poinsettia cut out of it onto the red cardstock panel. I used my Misty to stamp my Avery sentiment in the bottom corner with black ink. Next, I positioned one of the red die cut poinsettias over the hole and I offset the petals to give the look of layers and dimension. These poinsettia die cuts came from the white panels, and then I just swiped red ink over them and added some shimmer spray. I used liquid glue to attach the flower, but you could use foam tape to pop it up. Then I used liquid glue to attach the yellow flower center to the poinsettia. This 2-for-1 design is the most complex of the designs and will provide some options for creativity. It's similar to the previous card, but instead of using the die cut as another layer on the card, I used it to create another card. I started with a panel of printer paper. I put tape runner down all over the front of that panel so that everything will stick. Next, I used strips of cardstock to build my background. I made sure to get the first one as straight as possible by using the edge of the printer paper as a guide. You may be feeling like this card design is familiar. I've certainly done it a few times, and that's another great planning tip. Use designs that you're familiar with and you know will work. And if you need it to be super fast, you can use solid colored cardstock or pattern paper instead of building your own background. The participants can choose to use all the colors or just 2 or 3, whatever they want. As I placed each one, I made sure it was tied up against the previous one with no white showing in between. Next, I used a trimmer to clean up the edges and trim the panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I chose a snowman die and I cut it from my panel. This is another area where participants can choose. I plan to bring the snowman, some Christmas trees, and even a chunky joy word. For the first card, I glued the striped panel with the hole onto my white card base. Participants can then choose to stamp a sentiment if they want. I'm planning to show them how to use acetate to be sure they're happy with placement and to avoid smudges. And for the second card, I glued the white panel to the green panel and then my striped shape onto this panel. Then people can decorate their cards however they wish, with some gems and some flat embellishments that I created. So now these ladies know about embossing, stamping, die cutting. A really nice little introduction to card making that's not too much for non-crafters and maybe just enough to spark an interest in others. If you're interested in teaching your class of friends, I hope this has helped you think about what goes into that. It's really just another way for us to share our creativity with others, isn't it? It can be a lot of work, especially if the class is big, but it's also such a great reward for everyone to enjoy a fun evening and leave feeling successful with 4 cards they made themselves that they can send to their friends and family. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.